calculation. And it's difficult for me to see how, just as a matter of sort of simple logic, you can cry bloody murder while saying the kind of the murderous regime which you're decrying is the best way forward. I think that is politically tricky for them too.
Yeah, there are two real parties that will be. I mean, it might be possible that as that election approaches, the Conservatives and maybe even the Lib Dems, if they've still got a voice by then, will take a step back and leave it to the Labour Party to campaign for Better Together. Because, this is a time when Labour is going to be campaigning very openly against the Liberal Democrats, because that's where their vote is going to come from if they want to win a majority in 2015. And I can't imagine seeing Alistair Darling and Danny Alexander sharing a stage while that's happening. So it's entirely possible that Labour will use that kind of anti-Tory message that they're going to be pushing as part of Better Together as well, and say, look, we're going to beat the Tories and we're going to represent what Scotland really wants in the UK again. And I think that could have some power for them, and we shouldn't underestimate that. But it does depend, obviously, on them beating the Tories. It also depends on Scottish people warming to Ed Miliband, which they haven't done yet. He's not popular in Scotland at all, and he's increasing in popularity in England, but not here. And nor is Joanne Lamont.
Well, the hard numbers are inching upwards. It must be said that she's doing a bit better in terms of recent polling. I think it was Ipsos did about her leadership. And maybe that's a nice wee point actually to kind of segue on to the third sort of topic, which is related to what we've been discussing already, which is about the role of the sort of the academy of universities and kind of academics in terms of this debate, informing and contributing to it. Michael, you spotted a story this week in the Scotsman, I believe. Do you want to do something about that?
Yeah, but there's a few things behind this as well. The basic story in the Scotsman's that more than £1 million has been given to senior academics to study the implications of Scottish independence. And these are being given by the Economic and Social Research Council. But I'd like to come back to that. Andrew's also involved. You're also involved in academia, and I have been. But it was interesting when Kevin said earlier about the kind of management style and, trying to put that kind of, it has to be marketable into art, because they've also tried to do that in the universities in recent years. Like before people get, for example, a scholarship for a PhD, it's quite common that they have to make out why this research would be marketable or useful for the market. I don't know if you had to do that, Andrew.
I happily didn't, but you're talking about the phenomenon of impact often is what it's called, in terms of the importance of the topic. And in some level, that's always going to happen. You're always going to have research agendas pushing particular areas of interest in other more marginalized areas of research which don't attract interest or funding. But it is a worry that lots of people in the academy have articulated about, well, who gets funding? What are the kind of topics that attract inward investment from business organisations, and all of the kind of new management nonsense that surrounds the sort of discourse about what is an interesting topic to study and what are the important things that the university should be contributing towards society. On one level, I think this ESRC thing is quite positive. I mean, it's a good thing that there is money on a very, very financially squeezed funding body such as the ESRC, which is going towards encouraging thought about Scottish independence. I think we want to see as many people talking and thinking about this as possible, from my point of view.
So that management style stuff is the kind of background to it, but I also have some reservations. I mean, just because it comes from a university, it doesn't mean we have to take it that it's necessarily impartial. I'm not saying it won't be the results that they produce, but there's no guarantee that it will be. If you think about some of the history, maybe you probably haven't heard of it, but I've done some of the research. There was a thing called Project Troy during the Cold War in America, where they enlisted basically all of the academics to help in psychological and different ways to produce kind of reports they want. Or in modern America, if you look at someone like Alan Dershowitz, who I'm just going to come out and say it's nothing other than a propagandist. And then if you think about the British situation, where the universities are something that evolved from the upper and middle classes and from the British state in general, and that's the institutional background. What guarantees are that the research would be impartial?
Oh, I don't know if does one aim for impartiality. I suppose in research, it sort of recall some of these concerns and differences you get about how the press talks about itself in America and in the UK, and often if you listen to, British political journalists, whatever, they will talk about fairness and even-handedness, whereas in America they still refer to a language of objectivity. I think there are obviously still academics who would strongly claim that their research is objective in character, but that is largely because of their institutional background in terms of, being political scientists, very strongly influenced by sort of modernist, if I can use that phrase, understandings of what we can know about the social world and predict about it. I think there is, though, a question about, well, who's in universities, and obviously there are a wide gamut of people, but if universities are dominated by people from the upper social brackets, and we know that upper social brackets tend to be much, much more hostile to independence than poorer people in Scotland, to the tune of about 25% gaps between what are called AB voters in polling and those who are DE voters, who are the poorest Scots. And it might not be surprising, perhaps, if you found that some of those concerns were reflected by the sorts of things that those in the academy do, how they find themselves, what issues they find interesting, what questions they end up researching. I don't know if either Rory or Kevin has something on that they'd like to contribute.
I think,
okay. Rory.
I think objectivity is always going to be a problem in academia and journalism, and anything that talks about independence over the next 2 years will get slated by somebody who disagrees with it. The BBC can't say anything without being attacked. Ian Davidson on one side and the internet community of the SNP on the other side. And then, the Scotsman recently has been under quite a lot of attack for its coverage of the EU. And yet all of these things do tend to draw on academic sources. And when they do draw on academic sources, there's always someone out there who can disagree with them. I think these conclusions may well be have some kind of objective merit to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to feed through to the debate in ways that people accept as objective. I doubt that even if they do say something that is eminently sensible and fully backed up quantitatively, there's no way it's going to be widely accepted by either side, because there's more to this than finding the truth of things. This is a political campaign, and academia is going to take a back seat to propaganda.
Also, it's unusual because, sorry, Kevin, just a second, but it's also unusual because it's money that's being set aside for predictive research, which is quite an unusual development. It's more than £1 million for something that might happen, which in this kind of climate seems slightly unusual to me.
Yeah, I was reading that article. What struck me was, are they going to actually commission stuff that's going to be useful? Or are they going to be putting reports out that, if you agree with it, you go, oh, this is a brilliant research. And if you disagree with it, you go, oh, this is rubbish, man. This is all biased. Because I think there is on the question of democracy itself and the mechanics of democracy, I think we need to commission some serious work here. Because, for example, we talk about everybody putting their own positive vision of how they'd like Scotland to be and how they'd like Scotland to develop. And this is about creating a new Scotland in the way that we would envisage it, rethinking Scotland in order to recreate it. Now, democratically, all that we've been offered so far, there's nobody said anything different to this yet, is that we're going to get a cross in the box in 2016. And we'll get another cross in the box, presumably in 2020. And that's it. That's the input of the Scottish people in creating a new country. 4 lines. That's it. Four squiggles. 4 straight lines. That's all you're going to get. Now, this is nonsense. You cannot create a new country and a new constitution and the democratic structures at local and national level and all the constitutional aspects of that with 4 pieces, 4 straight lines. So I think I'd like to see some more serious research being done on how democracy will work in a new country, looking at best practice and electronic democracy, for example, is introduced in Brazil 2000 and India in 2004. You have to look at best practice at local government levels. You have to look at best practice and digital democracy, taking the idea of trotting down to a community centre every 4 years. This is 19th century stuff. This is rubbish. If you're going to create a 21st century democracy, you have to start looking at democracy itself and improving it so that it becomes something that people can utilise into their normal life rather than something you do every 4 years. Looking at all these kind of things, I'd like to see some serious research done on that, of creating a 21st century digital democracy for Scotland, rather than just thinking we can solve everything with 2 crosses in the boxes. But I'll bet you any money that isn't going to be part of this academic research.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing in the debate as a whole is 2 competing sets of priorities. And I wonder how much the academic side of it will fall down on one side of those priorities. I mean, I've written about this before as kind of two ideologies of power that seem to be going on, which is where you've got the No campaign, or Better Together, and the media in general tend to focus on this idea of international power. They're talking about your influence in the EU, they're talking about NATO, they're talking about your currency, they're talking about your military, they're talking about all these things that are about how you compete with other countries in the world along very conventional means. While the Yes campaign are talking more about, values, internal senses of social justice, democracy, these slightly more kind of, I guess, soft power in a sense, how you think of yourselves and how other people think of you, rather than what coercive power you can exercise. I worry that this new academic initiative will reflect the priorities of the media and the No campaign a lot more. They'll research more into the EU, they'll research more into NATO, maybe not NATO, but the EU and currency and broader issues that are about how we exert force on the world stage. And they'll look less into issues of redistributive policies could work in independent Scotland. How has the union been economically or socially beneficial for us? Things like that. And I don't think that's going to be very high up in their priorities. I think they will look at the stuff that deals with raw power and coercive power much more.
And also, I suppose there's just to echo that very briefly, that there is a peril when you're thinking about the impact of this kind of research, and no doubt the fellows of this Economic and Social Research Council scheme will have to sort of justify themselves. Then, up to a point, it's in their own interests to write things up, to write up reports, to conduct research, which will make its way into the media, which you can say, look at the article. I was on Newsnight Scotland. I've contributed to the public debate. And up to a point, that means that the sort of research agenda is refracted through this idea of impact, through what the press considers interesting. And so Rory's concerns may actually be quite reasonable in some respects. Michael, sorry, you were going to say something there.
It was just that, I mean, to be fair, it's being done above a board. They have announced this money and they've announced the names of who's doing it, so it's all being done out in the open rather than like things that are being commissioned in secret. So, I mean, we could get some very fair results, and I suppose we talked about plurality of voices earlier. Well, if you ever want to see an argument, put 7 academics in a room and try to get them to agree on something. So I don't know how that's going to work out. I'm not sure they'll all produce reports of the same voice or same opinion.
Some of the people who've been, I noticed among the names was, John Curtis and that. And to me, sorry, I'm eating a bit of chocolate here. But John Curtis, these are the usual suspects as well. I mean, John Curtis pops up at everything, but he's a master of stating the bleeding obvious, but he never actually says anything of any substance on any subject. He just reinterprets what's right in front of his nose, which is usually overridden by events like 3 months later.
He's kind of more famous as a number cruncher more than anything else.
Yeah, so I mean, but these people are taken as a serious academics, and they're going to get a huge wedge out of this. By the way, yeah, they're going to get a serious wedge for putting these reports together. And this organisation that has got £200 million to fund these type of, not all going to these research, but they've got £200 million pot. If they want to spend it on that, that's fine. But I wouldn't really get too excited about anybody coming up with anything that's of any real substance at the end of it.
That's a cheerful thought.
Just to expand on my last point, I think there's so much of the campaign for independence, and you particularly see this from the Greens. And I love listening to Patrick Harvey and other Greens talk about independence, because there's this idea of, it's the same idea as you had when America was being founded or refounded by the European colonists. And they talked about this city on a hill, or the chance to forge a new nation, create something new using ideas that were out there. And this is why I support independence. Really, it's this idea that there are new ideas, new ways of thinking about things, new ways of thinking about economics, about society, about the role of the state, about the role of the military, and these things. And the problem is that this research is being done as part of an atmosphere of old ways of thinking. On the whole, it'll probably look at economics through the prism of how best can we grow the economy, not how best can we. There's the book Prosperity Without Growth. I can't remember the name of the author right now, which is about how you can achieve progress and you can call it societal progress without needing to grow your economy. The way we measure it right now is by how much GDP you can grow by, which is a woeful measure of national success. And yet this is not what these people will look at, I don't think. If they do, it'll be great. If they look at kind of some of the work by the New Economics Foundation on this is great. So you look at new ways of quantifying happiness, quantifying environmental impact,